I would like to welcome everybody to the regularly scheduled Public Planning Committee this day of Thursday, October 28th. Are we in compliance with FOIA?
Yes, sir, we are.
Thank you. Krista, would you please call the roll?
Certainly, sir. Mr. Ames?
Here.
Mrs. Becker?
Here.
Mr. Brown?
Here.
Mr. Stanford?
I'm here.
And I see our alternate, Mr. Lennox, is on the line, as is Mr. Harkins.
Thank you, Mr. Lennox, and thank you, Mr. Harkins, for joining us. Are there any recommended changes to the agenda today?
Move adoption is written.
Is there a second?
Second.
All those signify by raising your right hand. Thank you. Accepted and approved. Are there any additions, corrections to the minutes of September 28th?
Move adoption.
Hearing
is
none,
written.
is there a motion to approve?
So move.
Is there a
Second.
second? Thank you very much. All those in favor, raise your right hand, please. Krista, thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Before we begin, I just wanted to make a brief statement. I think the purpose of today's meeting is to introduce the idea of a beach management parking plan, or beach parking management plan to the public and also to the PPC. We're here to hear the staff's request for guidance on 8 strategies, which include a discussion on the enterprise fund, paid parking zones, technology solutions, parking enforcement, town manager administration, administration management enforcement services, something called dynamic wayfinding, and beach passes. I thought the Islander Beach conversation and discussion last Monday was very successful, and I'd like to replicate that today. So what I'm suggesting is that staff, Josh will make a presentation so that both we on PPC and the public can hear what is being proposed. We'll hear public comments after that, and then we'll go through each member of the Public Planning Committee and hear those opinions and suggestions to staff. After this meeting, I would propose that there be a series of public meetings where merchants and the public can deal directly face-to-face to the greatest extent possible with staff and public planning. If that has to be done virtually, we'll do it virtually. It would be my intention to move this along as quickly as possible, ideally coming back at the end of November to deal with these 8 agenda items so that we can give staff any additional comments and direction and the okay to begin working on the implementation and language dealing with these matters. I'm also would like to make one further comment prior to public comments, that I'm requesting that comments relate to today's agenda. And if not, I might suggest that you postpone your comments until next Tuesday, the 16th, at the full council meeting, so that all council members can hear what you have to say. Regarding public comment, before we have it, I'd like to remind our citizens of the town rules and procedures for taking public comment during a meeting. Each citizen will have 3 minutes to address the committee. At the end of the 3 minutes, please begin to conclude your comments. I ask everyone speaking today to please maintain a decorum suitable for the meeting. Krista, do we have members of the public signed up to speak?
Yes, sir. Citizens could submit electronic comments on the agenda item listed on today's agenda via the town's Open Town Hall portal. The portal closed this afternoon at 2 p.m. and the report has been set to the committee shortly thereafter for your consideration. In addition to submitting comments on the portal, citizens have been provided the opportunity to sign up and call into today's meeting. Today, we have one citizen who would like to speak on a matter not on this agenda and 9 citizens who would like to speak on the parking study. Mr. Chairman, would you like those individuals to speak on the parking study after the presentation has been made?
Yes, that would be my intention, so that council has so they have the opportunity to hear what staff is saying, which may influence what they have to say. So I think they would appreciate that. And then if the person who wants to speak unrelated to today's agenda, I'm happy to hear that at this time, but again, would suggest that it might be more appropriate to do it on Tuesday. But please ask that caller.
Yes, sir. The first individual is Patty Maurer. Ms. Maurer, are you available? Ms.
Yes,
Maurer,
this is Patty Maurer.
go ahead, ma'am. You have 3 minutes, please.
Hello, my name is Patty Maurer. My husband, Dr. David Maurer, and I have been residents and business owners on Hilton Head Island since 2000. I have never before felt compelled to speak personally at a council meeting or committee meeting until now. Tamara Becker's behavior at Monday's meeting was entirely unacceptable, as she referenced a video in her possession of a professional development training session open to the cultural community that she equated to nothing more than critical race theory. As a participant, I am very concerned that Ms. Becker will use the Zoom video to create snippet quotes to fit her narrative. EDI training requires trust, where participants believe they are in a safe space, and Ms. Becker's use of quotes out of context could be very damaging to our community. To that end, I would hope that the town manager and attorney advise Ms. Becker against weaponizing the words of the participants. As a participant, I don't remember signing a photo and video release. Ms. Becker offered to share the video publicly, and that is concerning to me. As the executive director of the Island School Council for the Arts, a small nonprofit arts organization, we have worked in partnership with the Office of Cultural Affairs since its inception and have been able to exponentially expand our reach in the island schools. ISCA has funded nearly $3 million in artist residencies, teacher grants, and scholarships to promote and advance the literary, performing, and visual arts education for all public, private, and homeschooled students living in Southern Beaufort County. Needless to say, I am quite insulted to be included in Ms. Becker's made-up conspiracy that the arts community intends to sneak CRT into the schools under the guise of arts classes. I am infuriated by her comments and dismayed by the lack of support from the council members as she continually targets the Office of Cultural Affairs and its director, Jen McEwen, with her personal agenda. As a resident of Indigo Run, I respectfully request 3 things. 1, that Ms. Becker stop using buzzwords such as critical race theory to try and incite a crowd, such as what happened on August 17th at the Town Council chambers. 2, that Town Council puts an immediate end to placating this divisive council person. 3, the 6 members of Town Council who believe in our community schools come take a tour at the public and private elementary schools to see what a difference the OCA is making in bringing arts and history into our community. As mayor and/or a member of Town Council, it is your responsibility to represent the residents of Hilton Head Island, which means an inclusive, multidimensional community with a mixed and diverse demographic. Thank you, Patty Maurer.
Thank you, Mrs. Maurer. Sir, that concludes the open session of appearance by citizens. As I noted before, the other 9 citizens are on the line to speak about the parking study master plan.
Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, I'm going to take a moment of my time to respond to some of the comments made by Ms. Maurer. Well, first, this is just predictable. Just as in Monday's meeting, there was a litany of misrepresentations easily debunked by fact checking. But here we have yet again someone who must think that a lack of transparency and use of public funds without authority in the realm of an unauthorized policy isn't an acceptable way to run a town. As a town representative elected by the people, it is my duty to be the eyes, the ears, and the voice to make sure that there is transparency and that what is taking place in the departments of the town hall paid for by the taxpayers has been approved through the town council, appropriately put into place. This particular program that we are talking about was not. Ms. Maurer should feel assured that I have no intention of taking snippets. However, the video is a public document. The question I would have is it okay to talk about the flag in a dishonoring way? Is it okay for our facilitator to bring out his radical self? Is it okay to talk about white supremacy and white power and whitewashing and development of ally groups, et cetera, systematic? The history on this island is a precious history. But what happened in that video barely touched on that. It was something much different. So those are my comments. And I've asked that those who think differently reflect upon whether or not this is a transparent town, whether the taxpayers' money being spent is being done appropriately, and whether they agree with those terms and that sort of workshop behind closed doors. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Ms. Becker. Mr. Gruber, would you proceed with the presentation regarding the parking master plan?
Yes, sir, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. I will start off by saying that the chairman has taken a little bit of the steam out of my sails because he's covered a lot of what I'm going to get ready to cover here in just a second. So I apologize for the repetitive nature of it, but it'll be good to cover it again anyway. Let me go ahead and see if I can share my screen here and we'll begin the presentation. All right, is everybody seeing that?
Yes.
Excellent. All right. So I want to start off today kind of first and foremost by giving just a quick summary of the project history that has led us to kind of where we are today so that everybody understands the moving pieces. This has been a project that's been going on for a while now. So I think it's good to just kind of provide a quick overview. In March of 2020, the town contracted with Walker and Associates to conduct a study with regards to our parking, primarily around the Coligny area, but also to include all of the town's beach parking areas island-wide, and to ultimately take the information that they gathered and develop a comprehensive beach parking master plan for the town to consider. From May to July of 2020, Walker and Associates conducted multiple virtual public engagement sessions with various stakeholder groups. They conducted one-on-one meetings with town council members, and they utilized the town's open town hall portal to solicit 860 individual comments on the parking recommendations and parking issues within the town. In October of 2020, Walker and Associates delivered a unified beach parking master plan that included a sequential step action plan to assist the town with implementing the recommendations that were outlined in their report. And on October 27th, Town Council had a workshop to receive this information from Walker and Associates. And also part of that was a request to answer any kind of questions that had come up from council or the public. And then subsequently on November 4th, Town Council unanimously voted to adopt the beach parking master plan with implementation of the plan's recommendations to occur following additional committee and town council review and discussion. And so beginning in late November through the beginning of this year, the Public Planning Committee has had some initial conversations with regards to the beach parking master plan. But we are here today to start talking about kind of what those identified steps are that we can be taking to move this project in a direction of action with an eye towards implementing some or all of the recommendations contained in the report. So in looking at what those next steps should be, as the chairman indicated, the first step that we would recommend is that we engage in some additional public outreach to obtain stakeholder feedback, as well as additional public comment. That action would begin within 30 days of today's meeting, so primarily through the course of November. And those comments that that are gathered and the information that is obtained would be included along with the previous information that was obtained by Walker and Associates and would be brought back to the Public Planning Committee in November or December for review and additional consideration by the committee. Following that review, if there is committee concurrence to continue to move this plan forward towards implementation, staff would propose to undertake the issuance of either a request for proposals or a request for qualifications, both essentially asking for the same information, but potentially stylized in slightly different ways. But essentially what we would be asking for is responses from qualified vendors that would help cover all aspects of a parking program that have been discussed throughout the course of these conversations. Those include, but are not certainly limited to, wayfinding and dynamic parking information, both of a physical nature and with a virtual nature, either through a mobile or web-based platform. Infrastructure improvements such as physical barriers, gates, signage, lighting, or personnel space. Technology investments, which could include the use of cameras, space availability tracking, communication, duration, expired meter tracking, amongst a whole host of other technology that's out there with regards to parking management and enforcement. Payment processing, again, to include both physical space as well as virtual web-based and mobile platform. While most people today have a cell phone or have access to a computer and the internet, not everybody does. So as much as we'd like to transition to those platforms because they are easy to use and are convenient, we cannot forget that we still will need to have some sort of physical presence in these areas if we're going to be collecting parking fees for those locations. We would also need an overview of program management. And then lastly, enforcement, both from a ticketing, towing, and administrative appeals standpoint. If we are going to implement an administrative sanctions process rather than seek to issue a citation in the Beaufort County Magistrate Court, we will need to create that program and create a due process system by which people would be able to use it, but then also be able to appeal those decisions and have them adjudicated in a timely manner. So within that RFP, you can tell it's pretty much, as somebody put the other day, soup to nuts. It includes all aspects of the program that we believe would be necessary to have a comprehensive parking solution. And we would look to identify a vendor that can help articulate all the various aspects of that program that we could then bring back to town council for further discussion in review prior to execution or implementation. So that is essentially the next step. We would obtain that information, identify a preferred vendor or preferred vendors, take that responsive information about how they would establish that plan and the various aspects of it and bring it back to the committee for continued review and comment. And then lastly, ultimately bring forward draft documents to include resolutions and ordinances as outlined in the plan's recommendations, if we are in agreement that we're moving forward with implementing the 8 criteria that the chairman had indicated at the beginning was included in the consultant's report. And just to cover those very shortly, those were listed as establishing a parking enterprise fund. Again, this would be accomplished by adoption of a resolution. Establishing paid parking zones at all town-owned beach parks, again, established by a resolution. Council already has the authority in its code of ordinances to implement parking and paid parking. It's just a matter of if we're going to change the rate structure, the fees, or how that occurs in particular areas, we would need to do that via a resolution. We would update the town code to be reflective of current parking practices and associated technology. Currently, some of our language talks about coin-operated machinery, some other things that are just antiquated in terms of parking operations, and again, is lacking in terms of providing effective oversight and management of the overall program, and does not include an administrative program by which we could address parking infractions. And I want to be clear that that primarily is related to parking at a meter without paying, having a vehicle that is extended beyond the time frame, or parking in an area that does not pose a public safety threat, but is otherwise not in a designated space as required by town code. Parking infractions such as parking in a handicapped spot, or parking in a fire lane, or parking in a manner that creates an immediate public safety threat would all be addressed separately, either through a state law citation or through the towing of the vehicle based upon the exigent circumstances and the public safety need. But when we have a situation where we're just looking at somebody who hasn't paid the parking fine or the parking fees, or has stayed beyond the amount of time that they've paid for, we're recommending that we put in place an administrative system to address those infractions. Let me go back quickly. I want to pause here just because that kind of outlines our next steps forward. They should be hopefully in conformity with what the chairman has indicated, and then kind of outlines where we would go with this if there's committee concurrence. And there's a little bit more to discuss, Mr. Chairman, in terms of the beach parking passes and the definition of a resident, but I think it might be better to take that up as a separate conversation outside of the overall beach parking management plan. So I'll pause here for any questions or comments that you may have with regards to either the next steps or what we might be discussing at a future point in time in terms of policy adoption.
Well, I'm certainly willing to entertain any questions of staff at this time, but it might be good if there's going to be a pause here to invite the public to address us at this time as well.
Absolutely.
Any member of a public planning committee want to ask Josh something at this moment? Okay, Krista, let's go ahead and invite the public to speak.
Certainly, sir. Our first person or identified citizen to speak is Mr. Bruce Kimball. Mr. Kimball, are you on the line, sir?
Krista, Mr. Kimball is on the line, but his audio has not attached.
Okay.
Krista,
Yes, sir.
Let's go to the next speaker.
Yes, sir. That is Mr. Lee Lucier. Mr. Lucier? Mr. Lucier, please go ahead.
Yes, ma'am. Thank you. And
You're very
thank you
welcome.
all for the opportunity to speak today. My name is Lee Lucier. I'm the CEO of the Richardson Group, which is the owners of the Clugny property. My main focus today is to request that this be brought back to a committee with additional studies, stakeholder meetings, focus groups, and information from throughout the town, the Clugny area, the Pope area, South Forest Beach, North Forest Beach area, and all residents of the island. We feel that this time moving forward would be catastrophic to the area without additional information that was not taken during the pandemic, such as the Walker study. That is our request at this time.
Thank you, Mr. Lucier.
Thank you.
Renee, has Mr. Kimball connected to the call?
Yes, ma'am, he has.
Excellent. Mr. Kimball,
Yes.
please go ahead and start, sir. Sir, go ahead and start. You may start your 3 minutes, sir. Mr. Kimball.
Krista, let's go to the next one.
Yes, sir. Our next caller on the line is Rusty Shaquiz. Sir, are you on the line?
Is the problem on our end or?
No, sir, it's not. Mr. Shaquiz, are you on the line, sir? Go ahead.
Yes, I'm on the line.
Go ahead, sir.
All right, thank you.
Problem on our end?
Mr. Shaquiz, are you on the line, sir? Go ahead.
I'm on the line. My name's Rusty Jaquist, and thank you for letting me speak here today. My main thoughts and concerns are with this study, like Mr. Lucier said, with this Walker study, I'm just concerned as to how and when it was performed, if it took into consideration the necessary metrics that allow us to make this decision correctly and educated. And I know we've been talking about parking, it feels like, in this area for quite some time, for years and years, it feels like. And I'm just nervous that by doing this decision, I feel like we might be going backwards in a way. And my main concern would be, is there going to be a contingency plan? Let's say this does come to pass. Will there be a plan to have real-time monitoring to keep up with it, to see if it is successful? And if it's not, if it becomes a disaster and a nightmare that most of the residents and business owners thinks it could be, will there be a plan to stop or mitigate or go backwards or change it or go in a different direction? Will there be a team put in place to look at these things? Those two things are my main concerns as far as this parking plan and how it's going to affect our business and our way of life down here on the south end.
Thank you, Rusty. Much appreciated. Next, sir, we have Heather Rath on the line. Ms. Rath?
Hi, Krista. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, ma'am, we can. Go ahead.
Awesome. Thank you. Chairman Ames, committee members, Josh and Mark. My name is Heather Rath, and I have been an island resident for over 20 years. I've owned my consulting business on Hilton Head Island for 12 years. I'm proud that one of my clients is Coligny and JR and Leslie Richardson. Coligny represents over 60 small businesses owned by local neighbors of yours and mine, residents of our island. Coligny generates over $90 million annually. Almost every single business owner lives on Hilton Head Island, and often their families work in their candy shop, their restaurant, or their dress shop. These island residents who own businesses in Coligny are extremely concerned about the impact a public beach lot being converted to paid parking will have on their small business. Businesses are already struggling with shortage of hours, shortage of workers, increase in manufacturing and food costs, and more. Add parking czar to the small business job description, and this policy could cripple revenue for the town and leave small business owners left to make hard decisions. But I do see a light at the end of the tunnel with today's comments. I urge you to allow the business community in the Coligny district to work with your new town manager, who is an expert in planning, to seek a solution that solves the issues that still need to be clearly identified. Currently, I can tell you the South End community of small businesses and the South End community of residents does not have a clear understanding of what the issues are and what council's true end goal is. I believe by us working with Mr. Orlando and understanding your goals, we can help keep the heart and soul of small business on Hilton Head Island intact. And of course, revenue flowing for the town, the county, and the state. Thank you.
Thank you, Heather. Chairman Ames, there are no other callers. That would be 6 that did not dial in, so you are free to move forward now.
And again, Bruce Kimball is now offline.
He has dropped off of the call, sir.
All right, thank you very much.
Thank
All
you.
right. All right, Josh, why don't you go on with your presentation and then we'll have council weigh in afterwards.
Yes, sir. So the next item we wanted to take up is kind of ancillary in terms of its discussion, but you referenced earlier this week, there was a discussion about the Islanders Beach Park. And one of the things that we do need to start discussing is the beach pass system. And the reason why it ties into the parking system, currently, if you are a beach pass holder, you are entitled to park for free at any of the town's metered spaces. So anything that we might do from a metered fee parking standpoint has a direct impact on the beach pass holder program and vice versa. So let me go ahead and go back to sharing my screen again.
Josh, can I just, while you're getting that set up, ask you to clarify that for me? Maybe, did I hear it correctly that currently resident beach pass holders can park for free at metered spaces?
That is correct. If you have a beach pass, you are entitled to park for free at any of the island's metered spaces.
Okay.
So just to provide some overview of the current parking program, we're currently in the 21-22 phase. Beach parking passes are issued at a cost of $30 per vehicle and are valid for a 2-year period. In order to obtain a beach parking pass, you must either live or own property within the municipal boundaries of the town. This can be established by showing a utility bill, a tax receipt, a lease agreement, or a property ownership card, such as one of the plantation identification cards. You must provide a copy of your current driver's license. This too can be used to establish proof of residency if the address shown on your driver's license is an address that is located within the town limits. And you must provide a copy of a current vehicle registration that shows a physical address located within the municipal boundaries of the town. The reason that this is required is because the pass is issued to the vehicle itself, and pursuant to our current regulations, the pass is supposed to be physically affixed to the bumper of the vehicle for which it is issued. We have had some issues with that particular aspect. Some smart and enterprising people have figured out that if they affix the sticker to a magnet, they can attach it to just about any car that has a bumper of any kind of magnetic material, or double-sided tape, or any number of other kind of ways in which they can transfer the decal. And the reason that the decal is important is because the presence of the decal on the vehicle is what allows you to park, and that's how enforcement of that requirement is primarily regulated. So issues that have arisen through this program, there's questions as to which type of property ownership qualifies for the issuance of a beach pass. Currently, if you're able to provide a Beaufort County tax receipt or tax bill, you're entitled to apply, but that does open certain things that we're not entirely sure were the intent of council when they created this program. For example, boat slips, cemetery plots, timeshares, and commercial property all receive Beaufort County tax bills, and therefore, in theory, would entitle somebody to apply for a beach permit, or a beach parking pass. Another issue that we've observed is fleet vehicles, or the quantity of passes that are issued for a particular address. If you have an individual, let's just hypothetically say that that individual it has a limousine or carriage service, and they have a fleet of 15 vehicles, but all 15 vehicles are in their name, and all 15 vehicles are registered to their home address as a home-based business. then in theory, all 15 of those vehicles can obtain a beach pass because again, they have a property tax receipt for their home that's on the island, and they have a vehicle registration that's listed for that address within the municipal limits of the town. Other issues that have come up is with out-of-state commercial vehicles. So you've got an individual who lives here on the island, either permanently or for some period of time, but their vehicle is owned by their company or owned by some other organization and is registered out of state. Currently, based upon our regulations, we would not provide them with a pass. However, many compelling arguments have been made to show that they are in fact a resident. They are just not the owner of the vehicle for which they're obtaining a pass, but that vehicle is in fact their primary means of transportation. Other issues have come up with regards to renters. Right now, we ask for a long lease, but there is no definition as to what is considered a long lease. In working with council to help hopefully identify some greater policy directives with regards to this issue, one of the things that we should define is what is the minimum period of time that you're leasing residential property on the island in order to qualify for obtaining a pass. And then lastly, one of the other things that's come up is golf carts. Currently, you can obtain a beach parking pass for your golf cart. This is primarily because state law allows golf carts to be driven on public roadways with certain limited conditions. One of the things that's can be viewed as potentially positive in this respect is that a golf cart takes up less space. And so in theory, you can have more residents able to visit a particular area because it's less space than what a vehicle is. But on the opposite side of that, it's also very hard to know that the people who are utilizing a golf cart are in fact a resident and not a short-term renter or somebody else who is using a golf cart that a resident has otherwise qualified for a pass to obtain. So those are all issues that we have seen come up with the current system that's in place. We want to kind of create an opportunity for discussion amongst council on this item because we're going to need to ultimately define this in a better manner. And so staff has at least started the conversation with things that should be considered or at least could be considered as part of that discussion by council.
Okay, let's come back to that, Josh, because I'd like to get to the meat of the discussion, which was the first part. I just didn't know how the two related. What was the last thing you said? There were two other items. What was the other item?
Well, no, this was just the beach parking pass. And the definition of a resident.
We'll come back to this after we go through the other items. So let's start with establish a parking enterprise fund. I would ask members of the Public Planning Committee to go ahead and ask your questions and state your thoughts on establishing a parking fund. Ms. Becker, do you want to go first?
Sure. I guess the enterprise fund being funded by parking fees, would it require seed money is one question. And then secondly, based on some of the information in the Walker report, there's a expectation that the revenues would definitely exceed the expenses. And just thoughts, and this is no question that has to be answered now, but thoughts from the others in terms of how that money could benefit the town in regard to beach maintenance, our beach manager now and his staff and the rest. And then, of course, as I've said before, excess funds being returned to the residents on the island in some form, whether that's a no-cost beach pass for their cars or in some other way. So that's what I have to talk about with regard to the first issue.
Thank you. Glenn?
Thank you. The concept of the enterprise fund to me is an exciting idea. because according to what our consultant has said, this whole program would be self-supporting and would generate a surplus. Being self-supporting means that it would include not only just the software and hardware that's necessary to implement the plan, but also would pay for the personnel to run it and to enforce it. One of our biggest problems here has to do with enforcement, and this would take care of that. And so that is a creative financial solution, as I see it, once we get to a plan that makes sense to all of us. So I think it's a vital part of the plan, and I'm excited that we have the opportunity possibly to develop such a thing. Thank you.
Thank you, Glenn. Alex?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. Are you looking for comments on just the first bullet here, Mr. Chairman?
Yes, I am. Yes, I am.
Okay, so I'll come back to some of the other comments that I have. So as far as the enterprise fund is concerned, I think we need to really take a close look at the projected revenue that is what was established in the Walker report. Specifically, what gets my attention is close to $500,000 being generated at the Chaplin Park. Without us having a clear understanding of how our capital improvements at all of our parks are going to enhance parking, I'm a little skeptical about those numbers. And also with current functionality, Chaplin as an example, many times of the week, month, and year, that parking lot is being used for recreational services. And I think we need to be mindful that our residents are using those parking spaces for soccer games and that sort of thing a lot. So I'm not sure if those numbers were generated with those factors being included or not. So I think that's something we need to really consider when we talk about this enterprise fund.
That it?
That's it on that one.
Okay, good. Conceptually, I think this is a viable direction that makes sense because we have issues with maintenance, trash, security, enforcement issues, and so on. And if there is an enterprise fund that will be able to bring those things together and the town be able to afford doing a good job across the board, then that makes sense. An example, just last year, council made the decision to build a pavilion for people with restricted mobility. Good idea. An enterprise fund would be able to pay for that rather than coming out of some other money source or the general fund of the community. So I think there's potential here. But I also recognize that anytime you speak to the public about creating another source of revenue, I think it's incredibly important for the public body to say how that money is going to be spent. So I think as part of the language regarding a resolution to create a enterprise fund, we should be fairly specific about how that money is going to be used. Another way of looking at that is to have a statement to answer the question, why create an enterprise fund? So again, I think being upfront and articulate with the public why we are even going in this direction would make sense. Those are my comments on the enterprise fund at this time. The fact that it is theoretically truly self-sufficient is important for us to keep in mind, because we shouldn't be establishing something else that's going to draw down the general fund. So I just think we have to be very critical in our analysis so that we don't make false assumptions. Thank you. Josh, why don't you talk a little bit about the paid parking zone? Any further comments on that you want to make at this time? Or?
Let me actually, because there was a couple questions in response to the enterprise fund, let me try to provide some additional information for that.
Good. If you have the answer, please. Yes,
I do. So Ms. Becker, you talked about the question of seed money.
Yes.
Obviously, with some of the stuff that we're talking about, when you talk about infrastructure, barriers, technology, things like that, that does have an associated cost with it. However, typically there's an option when you're looking at a parking management firm that they could bear the upfront costs of putting that equipment in place. What corresponds with that, though, then is typically some kind of contractual arrangement whereby they have a sufficient amount of time in order to recoup that cost. So there could be some upfront cost if we wanted to pay to put in that infrastructure ourselves, or we could choose to have a vendor put that in with the knowledge that they're likely going to want a longer period of time in terms of a management contract to then recoup it. So we've got a lot of flexibility there, but the bottom line is the aspects of it, the pricing of it is all something that we could bring back to council before you would have to make any decisions.
Can I ask you a question about that? And thank you so much for that answer. And hearing the comment that we got prior to starting this discussion with regard to, are there any safeguards that might be able to be put in place should this just really have been a great idea that didn't quite work out? Is it possible that during that time when revenue is being generated, that whatever those additional costs are, they are refunded, returned back to the original source, making that fund whole, and then continuing there? Does that make sense?
It does. And I think there's always going to be a way to unwind the program. Now, obviously, again, there may be cost, and once infrastructure goes in place, somebody has to pay for it. But we're never locked into something that we wouldn't be able to ultimately terminate. Again, with the understanding that there may be some costs involved, but there is also the ability to kind of do a 180 if we needed to at some point in the future.
Yeah. Thank you.
So there was one question about that. There was also a question about the revenues in the report. And obviously there's a number of assumptions that are in the document that go into kind of calculating what those estimated revenues would be. The comment that I wanted to make is, I understand Councilman Stanford did a little field trip and went down to Tybee Island and visited down there. They have approximately 2,800 parking spaces, which is about double what we have here. We have around 1,400. But in looking at what they have for their system that's already in place, they generate roughly about $6 million of net revenue every year from their parking revenues. So again, just to kind of add some real world context to what we have in terms of an estimate in our report, there is something that we can kind of look at in close proximity to us to kind of give us an idea about what we might expect. And then the last comment was there was the point about recreational services and folks utilizing some of those areas, not for beach access purposes, but for recreational or other aspects. When we talked about the beach pass holder system, the thought is that many residents obtain that beach pass. And if they've obtained a beach pass, they're entitled to park for free at any of the metered spaces. So if this is something that we go forward with, again, because those two issues kind of go hand in hand, that might be a way to address that concern through the understanding that anybody who has a beach pass would be entitled to park for free at any of those spaces.
Yeah, that there's the problem of overlap and scheduled times of athletic events and so on. So that's just an area we're going to have to look at pretty closely, I think. Yeah.
Yes, sir.
Okay. Go ahead.
Yep, moving on to the next subject then, because I think that covers all the topics. The issue of paid parking zones, again, that's something that council's going to need to take up in terms of making policy decisions. We've got in the report an identification of all of the town's beach parking access areas. And the consultants have made a recommendation based upon the market analysis that they've done as to what should be included as far as at least a starting point for discussion of parking rates at those particular areas.
All right. And Glenn, comments on number 2?
Yes, thank you. The parking zone issue to me is a very complex one. Josh mentioned that I recently went to Savannah, and I'll talk about that in my free time, but I did note that I think there's just one charge there, and the entire town is no free parking. It's all controlled by electronics, but they just have one parking zone. I think our community is totally different. The demand for parking and the use of parking in various areas compels us to define what parking zones might mean here. So that if someone was parking in a shopping district, say on Main Street, would there be a need for paid parking at all? Whereas if in fact we're going to adopt this program, clearly to me in an area like Coligny, there would need to be a need for that. And so we've got to study each of the various districts and areas in this town and how they are used in determining how to apply this program, if at all. But that is part of the process that we are beginning just now. And so I think we're heading off down this road, but we're nowhere near making a final decision on parking zones. Thank you.
Thank you. Alex?
Yeah, thank you. On this particular one, during Monday's community service meeting, I made the same comment, and I believe there was a slide that depicted our current, I guess, beach parking pass policy, and there's a certain percentage of the population or a certain percentage of the passes that are issued against the number of parking spaces. I can't remember which one exactly. Josh hopefully can help me with that. But I think it's important for us to visit that because we got 40,000 residents here, right? And if we're making an assumption that all of them are going to buy a pass, then these paid parking zones is then a disaster, right? Because Josh just stated that we only got 1,400 spaces at the moment. So this one is going to take a lot of work, as Councilman Stanton said. It's definitely very complex. But the ratio between parking passes as it relates to these zones, I think it's something that we have to include in our study.
Thank you. Ms. Becker?
Thank you. Right, and that happens to be true, but that ratio of town parking passes has always been, that number has always far exceeded the number of spaces available. I think that's probably one of the reasons why we are at this point, one of, not all of, but one of the reasons we're at this point in considering a parking plan to help to arrange and better manage the parking that's available. It certainly needs to be, or is in my mind, a priority that our residents are able to find a place to park, whether they're going to the beach or the park or shopping, and that our visitors, when they come here, have various opportunities to find some place to put their cars while they also enjoy the island's amenities and fine dining and shopping. Having said that, like many things, we're never going to be able to have a 1-to-1 ratio of a parking spot for all of those people. And the idea of having an hourly rate so people can pick and choose how long they're going to be there and then vacate that spot and someone else can come in makes a lot of sense. And again, I'll just reiterate, it would be my hope and desire that the residents on the island would get a pass, so especially since it would allow them to park where there is paid parking free of charge, but that this program would generate enough revenue so that that would be a free pass. But that's really all I have to say with regard to this particular issue.
Thank you. Josh, is this really limited to the parking lots per se at beach parks?
So within the study, I believe there's the 9 specific locations. All of those correspond with our beach access areas. So
Okay.
it doesn't include things like Town Hall. It doesn't include areas like Shelter Cove, or, we do have some parking rights, but what we're looking at is primarily the beach access area. So that's why we've labeled it Beach Parking Master Plan.
Okay. I think that simplifies something that Glenn was thinking about. Secondly, I wonder if there are beach access points where we draw that line a little differently. And I'm asking that question because of Coligny. If Coligny Plaza, portions of Pope Avenue, and other places somehow benefited from involvement. Now, I know the merchants don't want paid parking in front of their stores, but there may be a partnership opportunity here in other areas. So I'm just raising the question of looking at this maybe a little bit more broadly in the Pope Avenue, Coligny area. But that's for staff to noodle with. The idea here is also attached to one beach might be able to support a higher fee than another beach. Is that correct?
That is correct. The proposal that's included within the report differentiates between the parking areas, I think primarily based upon demand, or at least observed demand. And those areas which see a higher level of demand as compared to others have a higher corresponding paid parking rate as a suggestion.
Okay, it would be helpful to know whether other towns have used that same sort of technique, just in the future for our information. Is there any thought about different times of day?
With the technology that's available, there is the opportunity to look at a number of different avenues with regards to hours of day, times of year, even on-demand capabilities. So the first 5 spaces are charged X number, the next 5 spaces are slightly higher. There appears to be a very large number of options that we could choose between with the technology capabilities that are out there.
Yeah, again, I'd like to see if those have been applied somewhere. I'm interested in that. And one reason, I think that Ms. Becker hit on something that I'd like to also think about. If we're generating serious money here, I really wonder what a pass system for the island really means. If I don't know what the fair way of doing that, but certainly we ought to be defining what a resident is, and each resident dwelling unit ought to be able to get a pass to get into a beach parking lot. My thought is that residents would have a advantage to get to a parking place before somebody coming onto the island might. And that behavior choices might be a way of mitigating the issue of 40,000 people in 1,400 spaces. So again, I think the differential cost and then also time of day costs is important. But I'm sympathetic to what Ms. Becker is saying as a concept, because I don't know how you say to somebody who can write the check for $50, $100, whatever the number becomes, and somebody who might not want to write that check, but still is an islander. So just have to look at those things.
David, I have a follow-up comment if I could.
Please.
On the parking zones issue. It seems to me that the parking zones could also help us to regulate where people are actually making access to the parks. I think that's implicit in everyone's comments here, but I just wanted to state it explicitly so that if we want to be promoting people to go to a location other than Coligny, the Coligny rates may indeed be much higher than the rates, say, at Dreesen. And that would create an incentive to people to go to Dreesen rather than to Coligny. It just seems to me that is implicit in this, and it is part of the parking zones considerations. Thank you.
Thank you. I'll just add another comment that is somewhat tangential, but it seems to me that with each beach park that we have, there's a different expectation of the beach goer. And I think the personalities or character of the beaches ought to be developed to our advantage, and perhaps in some ways reflect an economic expense or cost to be there. So,
David, I just want to, since we're having a good discussion, want to agree with that, that across the island, our various beaches do have a different personality, and so do those who go to the different beaches. And one of the beautiful things about the Coligny area is its beach vacation getaway feeling. It's a quintessential experience. You really can't replace that at any of the other beaches on Hilton Head. And that's a lot of what people enjoy when they come to Hilton Head. And with good reason. There are good shops, there's good food, there's plenty of activity between the Celebration Park and the ocean there. So I think that in that area, we might also want to start thinking of what additional parking opportunities might exist so that should something like this plan come to be, we're not pushing down on this space and limiting people's beach experiences that they've become used to at that beautiful area, or worse, throwing those looking for parking into the neighborhoods nearby and causing problems that are unintended but likely to occur. So it's just another element that I think needs to be thought of as we think of the Coligny area, because that is where people want to be. Thanks.
thank you. Josh, shall we go to the next one?
Absolutely. In looking at the report, it references updating town code. Without going too deep into each one of the areas, I'll generally say that our existing code language is antiquated. I referenced earlier in the presentation that it speaks about coin-operated machinery just as one of those kind of things. At this point now, we should have mobile-based technology, we should have internet-based technology, and we should have the ability to have a kiosk instead of having individual coin-operated parking meters at each spot. And so our code needs to be updated to reflect the parking plan that we are building and putting together. And then along with that, we need the ability to manage that plan. And so the recommendation is that town council would authorize the town manager to oversee the program in accordance with town council directives, and then with associated reporting and oversight of the program itself.
Okay. Ms. Becker, thoughts?
Well, so I have a question that I'm not really sure is this is the best place to ask this one, maybe, but I'm going to ask it anyway. Is there an update on the metered parking over at Islanders and that status? And actually, really bigger question is, are there any other metered parking on the island that has any of the type of restrictions that we're exist over there?
I can answer the first part of your question a lot easier than I can the second. I'm not aware of any additional restrictions, but that doesn't mean that there aren't any. Part of the issue is that we're dealing with records that are over a decade old. And so some of the institutional knowledge that was associated with that is no longer here. So we can certainly take a look at that. Part of the issue derives from the state's definition of full and complete public access. So we have a beach management plan that is our agreement with the state, and within that plan is the requirement that we have the 1,400 public parking spaces. And in order to meet their definition of full and complete access, it has to be available essentially on a first come, first served basis to any person regardless of residency. So that's why the 25 metered spaces are in Islanders, because they were necessary to meet that definition of full and complete public access.
Okay.
That definition doesn't mean that you can't charge people to park, but you can't limit who is able to park there.
Right. So I guess what I was playing with is if we have paid parking across the island at these access points, these public access points, then that 25 metered parts that we're thinking about over at Islanders seem to be well taken care of, at least in my mind. I'm not sure how it'll ultimately hash out, but I'm hoping that's the case. And other than that, the idea of less visual pollution, I'll say, as with regard to having to see these types of meters or any additional signage, et cetera, is right up my alley. So as much of that as humanly possible to get rid of and to limit in the future would get my support for sure.
Thank you. Alex?
Yes, thank you. This one, I've got, I guess, a few things. I guess one big component that is missing here is the multimodal opportunity. Okay. We're talking about code that is reflective of current parking practices. And keeping in mind that our area is uniquely different than many others, with our limited space and close proximity to the beaches. So how we're able to better use alternate transportation to the beaches, I think, is important in this bullet, which leads me to the next one. As far as technology is concerned, I don't think that we need to just limit ourselves to how folks can pay through technology. And I'll just spread our wings here and go off of the island a little bit, right? We are welcoming to, of course, our visitors that are coming here to stay on a short-term basis. We're welcoming to our day trippers, our neighbors that are coming from our surrounding areas. But we have to make notice of where there is availability. And I think technology can help us with that. No need in sending someone that's traveling from Beaufort, Hardyville, you pick it, to come spend the day at the beach, and Caligny is at its capacity. And that doesn't necessarily equate to the cost of Caligny versus the cost somewhere else. The whole idea of identifying where there is capacity, I think, is important in this particular bullet. And the last thing is just being able to protect that beach experience. The Walker report really speaks to, I guess, the amount of cars that are in parking spaces. But I'm more interested in how that relates to the actual beach experience. Unfortunately, I don't visit the beach during the summer, during the daytime. It's evenings and night when it's a lot cooler that I would visit. But what that actually looks like during the heat of the summer on a low tide day, I think is very important to our discussion here when it comes to technology. Okay, so those are my comments. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Brown. Glenn?
Sorry, I couldn't find my unmute here. This bullet is referring to the need for revision of town code. Josh has made that very clear in that we do have outdated codes, and we need to adopt our code to the plan as we finally adopt it, or whatever it is we adopt regarding this. And it's time for us to break into the 21st century on our code and on our way of dealing with these crowd management issues, which is really what we're talking about here. So I look forward to seeing those revisions. I am pleased that there has been a review of existing code to identify where the problem areas will exist for us. And I'm happy to work with staff and whoever to bring about a clear statement in our code that actually does implement the plan as finally adopted. Thank you.
Thank you. Glenn, well said. I don't think we have a choice on this one. Yes, we have to amend the code to allow parking technology solutions, but we absolutely have to implement those solutions in order to manage what's coming down the pike and to provide as great as possible an enjoyable experience for people who want to get to the beach. Alex made a very important point. We are not going to be able to provide enough spaces for islanders, guests, and off-islanders coming to the beach, but we can tell people that our parking lots are full when they fill up. And I think that's a element of our hospitality and caring for people coming to the island that we can do. This is the area that I was referring obliquely to when I said maybe the parking zones should be thought of a little bit more creatively. We obviously have a serious parking issue in the Caligny area. And I'm not sure we can solve it if we are only looking at the public sector side of that equation in our ordinances, in our implementation strategies. And so I'm just wondering whether or not there's a technology element that could also benefit the private sector. And in some way, there might be a public-private partnership or strategy that allows Coligny Plaza and Heritage Plaza and other places, beachside, an opportunity to manage their parking spaces in a way that their clientele or their patrons are getting a parking space when they need it. And somehow this technology is keeping track of people who are there for other reasons. So those are my comments on that one, Josh.
Yes, sir, Mr. Chairman. The one note I would have in response to some of the comments that came up, and I'll go back a previous slide just to highlight it, within the RFP, RFQ that we had discussed issuing, one of the clear component pieces that would need to be included is discussion of what's called wayfinding. And that is the term that it helps to communicate information both about parking availability and parking non-availability. So it works both ways. And so we've got that clearly included in here in aspects of both potentially physical form and by a virtual application, either through a mobile or web-based platform. So that is something that we know needs to be an inherent part of this overall program.
Okay. One other question, I'm sorry, I'm going back to the parking zones. The parking zones as they're described in this presentation are only for parking meters. Is that correct?
That is correct. They're beach parking districts. And if you'd like, I can pull up. There was a chart that was included in the staff memorandum that outlined what those were. And it was pulled straight from the Walker report that outlined those areas.
Again, I'm thinking about different parks, but I'll use the Coligny area again. We have a number of residential properties on North Forest Beach that sometimes have problems with parking in that area. I'm just wondering whether or not we ought to maybe have a secondary term of parking area strategy or something that broadens the parking zone criteria to try to incorporate broader strategies that impact favorably residential areas near beaches. Thank you.
If I can just pick up on that, David, I think that's part of what I was trying to say before. I think that one of the things we have to be very cognizant of, in as you've pointed out, in the Coligny area, but elsewhere on the island, is that as this gets implemented, that whether it's through enforcement or through signage, whatever the mechanism is, that we don't create an unintended consequence in residential neighborhoods that are a result of our parking plan here. The parking plan has its merits, and I think that we should continue to explore those, but we need to make sure that we are thinking also of the unintended consequences for the residential neighborhoods, the businesses and the like. Anyway, just want to make sure, I think that we're all on the same page as that, but.
This is where I think the private sector, merchants and citizens play an incredibly important role in our creating a plan that is pragmatic and workable. So I'm inviting the public to participate over the next bit and test our assumptions. If we create straw men, challenge the straw man. Help us create the straw man. So I think that in order for these ordinances and the plans to work, we absolutely need the public input at this time. Thank you. Go ahead, Josh.
Well, before Josh does, I think we may be getting there, but I want to make sure, because we've been talking about cars and parking. One of the things that has, in my opinion, has to be an integral part of this, just as important as to where we put the cars, is providing opportunity for those who ride their bicycles to have a safe, convenient place that welcomes them to park their bicycles and to and the rest. That whole package that comes along with that, with bicycle houses, sheds, whatever the term is, I'm losing what it is.
Yeah.
But a pavilion of sorts that has a bike repair thing, a place for those who commute that way or want to get to the beach in that way, also are included, and hopefully that would help to cut down on the number of cars per se.
And Josh, isn't that something the consultant is going to be addressing?
Well, they did actually. In the report, they talked about.
No, I mean going forward as a part of the plan.
Well, yes and no. How it was addressed is that with the implementation of an enterprise fund, the revenues that are generated from parking fees can be used to provide the infrastructure for multimodal transportation, like Councilwoman Becker indicated. So the ability to have bike corrals, staging areas, things like that are a product of using the revenue that's generated from the parking fees to make improvements in your beach access areas. So that's what's in the report in terms of taking that money and reinvesting it to encourage those alternate forms of transportation.
Let's move on to adoption relative to parking enforcement to allow for administrative citations.
So this is kind of another outflow of updating our town code to be current with our existing practices. As I'm sure most of you are aware, our current ability to enforce parking issues primarily relies upon towing of vehicles due to the fact that the court system that we're using, the Beaufort County Magistrate Court, primarily requires physical service of any summons in order to be able to be brought before the magistrate for adjudication. And obviously with parking tickets, it's not practical to have a code enforcement officer or a law enforcement officer stand by a vehicle for 4 or 5 hours while somebody's at the beach and wait for them to walk back to the car so that they can personally serve them. So in order to be able to address that concern, what we are proposing is creating an administrative penalty system. So this is something that would not be taken to a court. It is something that would be managed by either the third party or managed by the town, but with built-in due process concerns of review and appeal, so that if somebody who receives a parking citation, which in theory would be punishable by the payment of a fine, or other kind of monetary penalty, if they believe that they've been issued that citation inappropriately, there's an ability for them to go before somebody and have the opportunity to be heard about why they believe that it's not appropriate for them to be issued that parking citation. So we would create a system in which we would outline all of those steps, and then once in place would allow us to issue these administrative tickets that could be paid by the individual or otherwise adjudicated through that process.
Okay. Glenn, your thoughts?
Thank you. First, Josh, a question. Is anything else in our enforcement mechanism having to do with the broad array of ordinances that we have here? Is there anything else that is also has an administrative enforcement provision? You know, I'm wondering whether something like building code violations is a similar process, because there ultimately I think there are fines that are possible, but you can jerk away someone's building permit ultimately. But I don't know if that's the same as parking. So I'm interested, do we have anything else like that?
Currently, no, we do not. This would be a standalone. The thought being that the ultimate penalty, if you receive a parking fine and you fail to pay it, the resulting action is that you would have your vehicle impounded or immobilized, but otherwise, you would be forced to pay the parking fines in order to retrieve your vehicle. With something like a building code violation, it is currently punishable as a municipal citation. And under our code, that's punishable by either a civil penalty, which is a monetary penalty, or under the right potential set of circumstances, it also could be criminal in nature and could be used for jail time. And so that's what we currently have. And the reason we have that in place is because if you fail to pay that fine, or if you fail to serve the jail time, the court has jurisdiction over that person to hold them in contempt and to ultimately compel them to comply with the penalty provisions for that citation.
Yeah, I think I understand the distinctions between a judicial system where you have to have personal service and this administrative system. Is there a similar administrative system anywhere else in existence in this town? And I guess going along with that question is, do we have any state law limitations or regulations having to do with such a system?
So there are no other similar systems in this town, but we are aware of other similar systems in other jurisdictions. I'll give you a most recent example. When the face mask requirements were put in different jurisdictions, some of them made them punishable by an administrative penalty of $25. And so we do know that those things are allowed if the appropriate safeguards of due process are included with them, because again, the penalty is what ultimately determines whether it is civil, criminal, or administrative in nature.
In conjunction with that, I will want an opinion from our outside counsel that such a program is in fact enforceable. Because I don't want to move off on something unless we have that type of assurance. But I think that what we have here is creative thinking around a difficult issue and a difficult problem having to do with enforcement. And I hope that in fact we can adopt this type of administrative system and have it provide adequate enforcement of our ordinances. Those are my comments, David. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Alex?
Yeah, I wish I had Councilman Stanford's legal background to deepen my thoughts here.
I'm not a lawyer anymore.
Okay. Yeah, I've got concerns about this one also. Let me try to tee this up with this in mind. I frequent the Coligny area year round, and of course during the summer when it is crazy busy down there. And I can tell you from personal experience that once we implemented some of the circle to circle recommendations, improving the boneyard that some of us may remember, gave us some additional parking, and putting a nice size sign out next to our beach parking that said free parking, it gave some relief to the Coligny Plaza in particular, with folks parking there to go to the beach, okay? Now, if we are indeed going to charge for parking, there's going to be signage that says so. And instead of folks behaving in a way of looking for something to pay, they're going to look for something that's free and convenient. So I'm concerned that, going in this direction, we will now start to see an influx in, business owners and even private property owners having to deal with folks parking illegally. And in order to deal with that, we've got to expand our services when it comes to keeping folks compliant into those areas also. And I just feel as if the more teeth that's in it, the better off you're going to be, so that we don't have these infractions happening in other places outside of just the metered parking, so to speak. So this one definitely needs more work, and I want to just make sure we keep front of mind the unintended consequences of it. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Alex. Tamara?
Thank you. So one of the things I like in the memo that was provided to us on page 3 is that at no point would a violator ever be subject to a criminal prosecution. I think as we think about all of these things, the one thing that we don't want to see happen here on Hilton Head is creating something of a police state, which is probably the wrong term to use, but a place where people are worried about everything that they do. We want to have our residents have the opportunity to park, and they understand that even with a beach pass, that there are limited parking spots on the island. And that's just something they know from past practice, and moving forward, likely not to create a problem. But for our visitors too, we look to welcome them and be hospitable. I don't want for them to feel that they're in jeopardy when they walk on or drive on to Hilton Head. Having said that, though, there has to be a mechanism in place that allows us to say in no uncertain terms, there are certain things you can't do when you're on Hilton Head, and parking past your extended time, parking in the wrong no places in a no parking zone in a residential neighborhood have consequences. Leaving trash on our beach, digging big holes, the rest, as we've already started to formulate, so that we have managed these types of behaviors need to be put in place. I think that just keeping in mind what we're doing, the purpose of it, and not overdoing it is probably a safe message to keep in the forefront and be cognizant of as we're creating these type of provisions for enforcement. And enforcement is critical. I get it, but that's what I have to say with regard to that.
Thank you. And I'll sort of piggyback on those comments. I think that it's a balance between our smiling, warm Southern hospitality and a big brother complex heavy-handedness. And so this is a balance, and I think it's necessary. I don't know what the size of the citation ought to be, but I suspect that there will be some repeat offenders. And I don't know if we will have the technology, Josh, in our system to be able to keep track of offenses so that we would know that, and whether or not it does make sense, if we do, to have a scale of fines. But I think this is a necessary tool to manage our beach experience. And the way I'm looking at this is that the enterprise fund gives us, the town, residents, visitors, the money to improve and maintain our beaches and the beach experience. And so without that enterprise fund, essentially what we're doing is requiring our citizens to take money out of the general fund. And many of those citizens don't go to the beach or are already tapped out. So I think it makes sense for us to put a financial burden on beachgoers. And then the question becomes where and how, and if somebody isn't playing by the rules, what? And so I think a citation is something that we need to pursue. It's just a question of what that balance is between hospitality and enforcement. Thank you, Josh. Anything else you want to add on that particular section, having heard what we've said?
Other than to Councilman Brown's comment, and I think it falls in line with your statements just now, I think we have to have multiple avenues available to us. So the ability to issue a parking citation needs to be one of several factors, the other being potentially the ability to tow a vehicle if the circumstances warrant it. And then we can work to understand when those circumstances may or may not be appropriate.
Okay, thank you. Let's go on to the next one.
So that is the end of at least of the recommendations that we would address via the ordinances and the resolutions that we would propose bringing back to begin implementing this process.
All right, so that in your presentation, it was also empowers the town manager to administer the parking policies adopted by council and then assess and implement administration, management, enforcement services for parking related functions. Have we covered those indirectly?
We did. When we talked about updating the town code, that's one of those things that's
you're including those in that. Oh, okay.
That,
Okay.
yes,
All right. Thanks. Okay. Now, when we were just, let's go to the parking pass conversation. Glenn, do you want to take a shot at making comments on this? I have a couple of reactions to our trying to do this at this time, but I'm open to hearing what other members of the Public Planning Committee think.
The concept of parking passes is vital to those of us who live here because we are paying for the establishment, maintenance, and provision of these beach access points. So we're already paying. And the idea behind the having paid for parking by non-residents tends to pass on some of that responsibility. I recognize that everyone that lives here doesn't have a pass. And I also recognize that there have been abuses of the pass. But some way to allow residents to continue to have, let's use the term preferred parking in the sense that they're not paying as much as visitors are, I think gets closer to a level of fairness. I have always had the philosophy since I've been in this office that I try to look at all of these issues from the point of view of Islanders first. And so we need to continue some form of resident parking pass. No, I don't think it's going to continue to be a sticker on the bumper. It's going to be something much more sophisticated than that. And we can certainly layer that in. But I do think that we need to continue at all times to consider the interest of the residents and their need for access to the beach on a preferred basis, on a less expensive basis than it is for non-residents. I think those are my comments on this.
All right, thank you. Alex?
Yeah, I'm struggling with this one just a little bit because I mean, our current policy with the $30 good for a 2-year period. I don't know, one can argue either way if that's acceptable or not. I think I'll have more to say on this once we get better numbers in place as far as the potential revenue, because currently, as it stands, any and everybody that is a resident on Hilton Head can go find someplace to park to access the beach in a public parking lot for free. I mean, you can choose to buy the pass or not, right? So going back to what Councilwoman Becca stated much earlier, which is if we're going to have a revenue stream coming in and we're going to put residents first, then there's opportunity that all of our residents still have that opportunity to park for free. So the whole idea of giving that opportunity to all of our residents, absent any type of economical status, I think is very important to this discussion. So I'm not weighing in as far as the amount. I'm weighing in as far as making sure that we still have beach access accessible to our residents that's going to essentially not have a cost associated with it.
Thank you. Ms. Becker?
So I had written down a couple of notes when Josh was talking earlier. So just a couple of questions before my comments. You mentioned that multiple passes per family. When you talked about that, you talked about the commercial aspect where a commercial company can, with a residential address, can get a pass for each one of their cars. That's one thing that I think should be fairly easy to put some parameters around to keep that from happening. The other thing about that is the idea that the sticker has to be permanently affixed to the car. Not all of us, but many of us either have one or two cars that we drive, sometimes one, sometimes the other. And so if we only have one pass, I'm not seeing the true issue with being able to move it from one registered car to another registered car. Or at a meeting recently, someone mentioned that, well, what if I have a family member here and we're driving in their car? Why couldn't I take my pass? I'm a resident. And I'll use myself as an example. When our kids come, our cars hold a maximum of 4. However, if I've got my daughter and son-in-law and grandchildren, we need a passenger car of 7, which they drive. And so that's the way we would get to a beach access, and their car would be the one I would need to drive and wouldn't be able to. So I'm just wondering why it has all of that to say. I'm really wondering why it has to be able to be affixed to the car. I understand that the pass is registered to a resident, and that resident definition is a must to be hashed out and to be put into our understanding, if not ordinances, so that it's clear to everyone when they see the word, what it means. But the affixing it to the car, that just kind of, so that was one of the things that came up when you were talking about these things, Josh, that just any deeper thoughts that anyone has on that, I'd appreciate hearing them. Also, I was surprised, though, as I was sitting here thinking about it, I guess I have seen timeshare owners get a tax bill. So the clarification on timeshares and whether or not just a week ownership or 3-week ownership makes them truly a resident, even with a tax bill, is something that must be hashed out as we're coming up with that definition. You mentioned the long lease, which doesn't really have a definition, it's just words. Golf carts. I'd like to hear more about the public roadway and how that might impact golf carts being able to be used in public space that people are using for beach access. And then we have the issue of mooks and bikes and pedestrians, all of which also is important to define and to understand how that impacts the uses of our beaches. And those have been conversations that we had in our last meeting, that we've been having in small groups with residents around the area, those in particular who are interested in having Islanders Park be residents only, which has all but nothing but merit to it. So I'm not sure I really have a strong question, one particular question, but all of those questions I think are really important as we look at what a beach pass holder program is. And I've said it twice, I say it all the time, I'm just going to say it one more time. But the logic between my thinking that whatever revenues are generated go back to the residents, and in particular towards any fee for a vehicle or two, is that their residents already pay their taxes for use of the space on the island. They live here and are involved in our daily life. And it makes no sense to me, 0 cents to me, that for all these years they've had to pay an extra fee to park their car or get a parking pass to park their cars. And untold numbers of visitors come in and park wherever they want to for free. So in an issue of fairness, I think we are on the right track when we start to correct that dynamic and make it a truly Islanders first representation of how these monies are spent in the future. Thank you.
Thank you. Josh, question. I don't remember the consultant specifying a time of day that metering of some sort or another would be in place. Did they make a recommendation?
Within their report, they made a recommendation with regards to time of year. So calendar days rather than hours, I believe. However, we are aware of other jurisdictions that do look at certain peak parking hours. So if you're in by 6 a.m., it's one amount. If you're after 9 a.m., it's another amount. One of the things that we'll do in coming back to the next meeting is try to outline some of those things in a little bit greater detail about what other jurisdictions are doing with regards to dynamic parking, either the date, time of day, time of year, or location.
I think one thing that might impact revenues is if we took a stance that we, as Alex Brown was suggesting, that we didn't want to impede the public from having free access to the beach. There might be times of the day where metering occurred that allowed people to get to the beach, to run on the beach at sunrise or to fish, easy access, no cost, casual. It is, in my opinion, one of the incredible benefits that we as residents have to be able to go down to the beach and enjoy it. If if you want to take a towel during the middle of the day and lie down, that's a different experience that I'm talking about. I'm talking about the informal, spontaneous opportunity to just walk at the beach at sunrise or at sunset. So I would be looking at a metering system that didn't prohibit any islander or any person on the island from enjoying that at that time of day. I think a 6 a.m. would be too early and would prevent people from being able to have that experience. The second question I would have, just in formulating a strategy, are there times of the year where we just wouldn't expect to have revenues? You know, if it got too cold and somebody from Canada wanted to be on the island and walk on the beach, are we going to be charging them $25 a day, or whatever number it is? I think that is a down the road kind of penalty, burden, cost that we can consider when we really have a capacity issue 12 months of the year. So I'm thinking that free access at the shoulders of the day, maybe a seriously reduced or no fee at all during a few months of the year. I'd just like to test the consequences or results of those assumptions on revenues. If we were to go in the direction of passes for residents, I think this came up at the Islanders discussion also, is the definition of a resident someone who's been here 183 days of the year. And I think that really is a good direction to head rather than property ownership. And somebody who is renting long-term, I would consider a resident. So there's that twist that would have to be dealt with. I would also say that at a beginning point, and this contradicts what Tammy was suggesting, I think it ought to be 1 pass per residence dwelling unit. And I think that convenience may have to be compromised in order to maintain control of the system. But again, I'm not at the point yet to say that there ought to be a fee pass system for the island. I think that islanders are going to need a pass in order to be able to park in front of a meter or whatever happens. But whether or not that pass has a fee, I'm still open on that issue.
David, I'm not sure that it contradicts what I said, but rather supports it. I think that might be the solution in terms of having the sticker on a car. If it's just 1 pass per actual residential, one residence, though it may have its own pitfalls, provides us somewhat of a solution to the car affixed sticker. But anyway.
Okay, all right, thank you. All right. Are there any other comments on the Beach Pass holder program before we go on to the next item of business?
Just that in the report, there is an area, and I was trying to find it while you were talking, but I was trying to listen and look at the same time, so I didn't miss what you were saying. But in the report, there is a section that speaks to a different type of parking arrangement, no parking, et cetera, for events for different types of the year, those early morning walks on the beach, that sort of thing. That's all logical and has a lot of merit to it.
Thank you.
Mr. Chairman.
Yes.
You're moving on to the next agenda item when you say order of business.
Well, I just want to close this one. Did you have something you wanted to say on the beach parking?
Not just the pass, but beach parking, yes.
Oh, all right. Please, go ahead, please.
Sure. Yeah, I appreciate what you're suggesting, Mr. Chair, as far as us having a series of workshops to invite the public in. I think it's important, since the whole beach management discussion is currently lying within two subcommittees of council, that we work towards some efficiency when it comes to our public being engaged. Okay. And I'm hoping that Mr. Orlando is still on the line here, because I really just comments off of him. You know, because what we decide as far as facilities are concerned absolutely affect some of the decisions we're going to make when it comes to the parking study, right? So if staff can, I guess at the outset of each one of these workshops, either Community Services Committee or Public Planning Committee, that we have some type of tie-in or overview as to where we are in each one of the processes, I think will be beneficial to the public and to us as we try to weed through this.
Thank you, Alex.
David, are you asking for our concluding comments on parking?
Yes, please. Yep,
Well, may I go ahead now?
you may.
Thank you. Thank you. We have approximately 40,000 people who live here. We have a couple of million visitors every year. And our main beach location provides 1,400 parking spaces. Ladies and gentlemen, we have a problem. This is the reason that we are engaged in this exercise. I want to make it the very best we can, but there's no doubt in my mind that after we adopt it, we'll have to come back and make some revisions based upon experience. And that's normal and that's fine. It was mentioned earlier that I went to Savannah. Well, I started thinking about parking in beach communities, and I asked, are there any other beach communities in our vicinity that have free parking? Answer was no. So I said, all right, what's the closest one? Well, being lazy, I went over to Tybee. I was knocked down when I went to Tybee, because as soon as you enter that town, you are made aware of the fact that there is no free parking. There are signs. I know we're hesitant about signs, but there are signs all over the place, including the residential locations. I don't know whether the so-called 2,800 spaces that are afforded in Tybee includes those near residents. I suspect that it does, because their beach area is not that much bigger than ours in terms of actual beach. But they have signs everywhere. It is all managed electronically through an app. They have actual enforcement out. When I was there, it wasn't a particularly busy day, but I saw two different enforcement officers going around, not going up and checking meters, but rather looking at their laptop computers, which showed them who was parking where and who had an app to park there. That was very impressive to me. And then I hear that out of those 2,800 spaces, they're able to provide that program and generate revenue for the benefit of their town coffers to the tune of $6 million a year. Then I move on to the program that we have been presented with by our consultant. I see a lot of creative ideas here. I think that each of my colleagues here has had constructive ideas and suggestions about areas that we need to study and develop more. I heard earlier one of our speakers imply that this was being rushed. The facts are that we started this exercise more than 18 months ago. The plan was proposed to us about a year ago. And we have been considering it since then, and all of that has been open and in the public. So the fact that we are moving forward with decision-making now certainly doesn't mean that this has been rushed. There's been full notice to everyone that we're considering this. I think that the approach that's been suggested here of having a series of meetings where the public is more actively engaged and able to discuss these issues with us will be very helpful. And there's no doubt in my mind, but that we're going to get good ideas from our residents that haven't occurred to us before. And I am more than willing to accept those and work on those. That being said, because when I started these comments, I said, ladies and gentlemen, we have a problem. It is clear that we do, and I want to have some form of resolution of that problem in place for the next warm weather season on this island. Thank you.
Thank you, Glenn. Tammy, any ending comments, summary comments on this?
Well, just one request first. Can we take down, Josh, can we take down your screen share? It's hard enough not being in the same room to interact with each other and have these important discussions, but not being able to see each other's body language and reaction is also, thank you. Anyway, done. Appreciate it. I think Glenn pretty well summed it up. We have a problem. I think the numbers demonstrate them. And he could correct me if I'm wrong, but one of the things with the Tybee reference and back to my police state concerns is that, as I recall being told, in the back of the lifeguards chairs, instead of having cute pictures and sayings for the day, etc., which are nice, instead they put notice up that as of whatever date, maybe within a week or day or whatever it is, there have been 15 cars towed, 25 cars issued summonses or whatever the case may be. So there's a reminder to people that this is serious and we mean business, it's happening. And I think that that type of gentle reminder is also useful in changing some of those behaviors. So I'm going to leave it at that. I think it's a good discussion and I look forward to it continuing and for us to solve this problem.
Thank you, Tammy. Let me try to summarize in as few words as possible where my head is on this. At the outset, I made a comment, why are we doing this? And I think the bottom line for me is we're doing it to enhance the beach experience. And the enterprise fund gives us the dollars to improve, maintain, provide security, all those things that I think are integral to having a enjoyable, trouble-free beach experience on Hilton Head. Will we ever have enough parking? I think that's the old church on Easter issue. Clearly, today, we have violations of parking in North Forest Beach and in other places. So I think that you might say today we've reached our capacity. So if we build another 2,000 parking spaces on the island, at some point, we are simply going to have that many more people on the beach. And so I think a fundamental decision that is a part of this conversation is what is the beach experience that we want to provide and maintain on the island. So I think the number of parking spaces on the island is a real issue to maintain, enhance that quality. Then you get into the issue of, okay, now you're forcing people to look at other places to park. They've gotten to the island and the parking lots at the beaches are full. What are they going to do? Well, they're going to go to somebody's private street or neighborhood street and try to park. So then you have the enforcement issue. So I think as I look at this package, it's all connected. But the bottom line is we're going in a direction to enhance the beach experience. And that builds value for our residents, for our visitors, and for our businesses. And so I think this is a positive direction, but we absolutely have to have the input and practical experience and perspective of merchants and residents on this island in order for this to move in the right direction and be implemented as flawlessly, as seamlessly as possible. So I'm again saying, let's take 30 days or whatever it's necessary and come together and throw out the darts, try to figure out how we're going to solve them, and jointly create the very best plan that this community can put in place, because we need the plan and we're going to have to make things work. So I appreciate everybody's comments up to this point. Those are my comments. And Josh, let's go on to the discussion on short-term rental update.
Yes, sir, Mr. Chairman. For that one, I'm going to hand it off, at least initially, to Ms. Lewis. I think she's going to provide you with an update, and then I'll be available to answer some questions that have come up recently that are ancillary to that update.
Thank you. Terry, welcome.
Thank you. Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Terry Lewis. I'm the WV Community Development Director, and I'm here this afternoon to provide a brief update on the short-term rental ordinance initiative. We are currently in the data collection and data assessment phase of this project, and I think it's really important to explain that. I've been sharing that with everybody that I talk to so that people understand that there is not a drafted ordinance right now. We're not in the process of writing an ordinance right now. We're trying to just collect as much information on this topic from all kinds of different people as we can. So to date, we've held 6 focus group sessions over the past month and look to hold several more in November, to include meeting with some short-term rental unit owners. We plan to put out a survey within the next 2 weeks using the Open Town Hall portal, and are working on scheduling a virtual open house in early December. We will be working closely with Carolyn Grant to get this information out through all of the town's social media outlets. Because again, like I said, we really want to get as much participation as possible. The initiative page on the town's website has been updated to include an option to submit a question about the project. And there's also a link to sign up to receive project updates. I'm going to be providing a monthly update at each PPC meeting throughout the life of this initiative. So there will be many opportunities for me and others on the team to share what's going on with the committee and the public.
Well, thank you. I have a question, but other members of council have a question?
I would just say I'm pleased with the approach that we're taking. What Terry just outlined is something similar to other actions we've taken. We just talked about doing that on parking. This is good. We're drawing in more public input and having the public truly engaged in these things. And that's nothing but healthy.
Yeah, I agree. Alex or Tammy, anything?
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay, Tammy?
So I know that we are in a process here that makes a lot of sense. We all here know that we have heard from residents across this island with many concerns, most of them the same, some different, but all of them intrusive into people's quality of life and take away from their residential neighborhoods that they moved into, believing that they had a safe and quiet place to enjoy. Having said that, there was one particular resident recently who is very frustrated, and I'm glad we're having the public engagements too, and I keep encouraging everyone to participate. Terry knows I send her names, I send her people, and I appreciate her getting back to me with all of the updates that she does. Thank you, Terry. But I just want to talk about this particular resident in North Forest Beach who's had it, who's miserable here, and finds themselves on the West Coast right now, and doesn't really relish the idea of coming back to Hilton Head. Long-term, long-standing residents of this island, and their lives have been made miserable because we have these issues with short-term rentals invading the residential neighborhoods. And she's also lost faith, or she and her husband have lost faith in the fact that we're going to do anything meaningful about it, that they've been promised and promised, and they've heard it all, and they've participated, and they're frustrated. So I just want to say to not only to them if they're listening, but to others who are also equally frustrated, that I believe, and everyone can speak for themselves, but it's my sense that you have a full commitment of not only the council, this committee, but the staff as well. And it's being demonstrated every day, and monthly reports will happen, and that's great news, and it can't happen soon enough. There are people literally pleading that we get this ready and in place for this coming season of rentals on Hilton Head Island. So that's really all I wanted to say, just how important this is to how many people. In any case, that's it.
Thank you, Tammy. Alex?
This is not I guess not a pool that I normally swim in when it comes to short-term rentals, but I will give staff props that they are reaching out. I've gotten correspondence and calls from folks that are definitely interested in the topic, that know a lot more about it than I do. So having that opportunity to engage is definitely important. So I'm firmly believing that we will come out on this with a balanced product that makes sense for our community. So that's all I have, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Terry, I learned earlier this week that there are approximately 8,000 short-term rental units on the island. I don't know if there's any way that as a part of your research, you can find out how many of those 8,000 units are under management contracts with island companies. The corollary there is how many are on VRBO, Airbnb, by owner, and so on. I'm concerned, and I think the Chamber of Commerce is concerned, that we are losing our ability to reinforce and promote the brand that we want on the island, as more short-term or rental, as more condominiums and residents transition into short-term rentals by owner. Oftentimes those owners live in faraway places, have little connection to the island other than the island is an investment vehicle for their retirement or for their portfolio. So I think that this conversation around short-term rentals also has an impact on the very essence of our community, not just the neighborhoods, which we're very aware of, but also the longevity of our brand or the safety and security of our brand. So I bring that up for staff's consideration and for other members of town council. I'm also wondering, Josh, as neighborhoods transition from purely residential full-time islanders to short-term rentals, at what point does that neighborhood become a commercial land use? And does that have any opportunity for us in our ordinances or in our policies to look at? That's a question for you, Josh.
Mr. Chairman, that is something I'm going to have to take a look at, and we'll have to get back to you with a response. I know I'm sure there's several different aspects that come into play with regards to it.
Yeah, I'm not surprised. But to me, that is really a sort of a fundamental aspect of what we're dealing with. At the point that a domicile becomes a investment commodity, we lose a residential characteristic that our zoning is trying to protect. So I'm just raising that. I'd be interested in your research. Thank you.
Great question.
I see the town manager. Welcome, Mr. Orlando. Do you have thoughts about today's meeting?
Hi, well, very positive feedback from today's meeting. I appreciate all of your input, took copious notes. We've got some work to do. I think Josh laid out the plan for parking very well, and diving into short-term rentals. To answer your question on that, short-term rentals, it's addressed differently in different communities across the United States. And so I appreciate that Terry is doing a lot of research, and the sooner we can provide that as a summary, Terry, I know you're working on that with the consulting team. The sooner we provide that and really slow down and take a look at if, as communities, you look at those uses as residential or a short-term rental itself as its own land use or quasi-commercial, the sooner we really look at that summary, the better. But, you know, in all, just a lot of good work to do. I'm tracking. I've been on the call the whole time. I jumped off the camera for a minute when someone walked in, but I think just a very productive meeting, Mr. Ames. I appreciate that we're going to slow down to go faster, so to speak, on the parking and the short-term rentals.
Well, Mark, I want to say thank you for your leadership in the entire planning area and staff support in moving these critical initiatives forward. I think that we've got a number of things on the table that are really important to the future of the island, and getting control of the beach parking situation, short-term rental situations are just two of those. So appreciate your support on all of this.
And yours as well.
With no further business before the committee, the meeting stands adjourned. Thank you very much.
Thank you, everyone.